Let's have a listen.
I'm asking all of you guys. Name one Palestinian. Name one Palestinian. Name one Palestinian. Name one Palestinian. Name one Palestinian that would be acceptable to do a peace deal with. And guess what? You're not going to have one name because you don't want peace. Go ahead, name him.
Hang on. All right, Cenk. Let me ask Ben. Ben, name one Palestinian who would be acceptable for a government in Palestine going forward.
Any one of them that promises to not work with Hamas or Hezbollah is someone that you can do a deal with. If the only people that come to the table that are in charge of the Palestinian people are those that have direct ties to terrorism, you cannot do a deal with terrorists because the terrorists will never stop being terrorists. So I would ask you this question. Name one Palestinian leader
not one
that
person
you can bring to the table that has no ties to Hamas, Hezbollah, or Iran, that is willing to kick them out and kill them on their own, and then you will get a deal done that will also release the hostages. And the problem is you can't name one because it doesn't exist.
Mahmoud Abbas. I just named it.
Mahmoud Abbas. He's a fantastic suggestion. So first of all, just to recap here, Cenk suggests that the reason you can't name someone that you are prepared to negotiate with, or that you would suggest that Israel should negotiate with for some sort of peaceful solution, is because you don't want peace. And you say that it's because they're all terrorists, but the reason you're saying that is because you don't want peace. And Ben's response is perfect. It's sound, it's clear, it's straight to the point, and he says, listen, a peaceful solution is only a possibility if you're working with people that are interested in peace, at least potentially. You cannot work on a peaceful future, on a peaceful outcome with terrorists. And so he continues and says, you think that we ought to negotiate and work on a peace deal? Okay, you suggest someone that we can talk to about a peaceful future. And so Cenk says, oh, I have someone to offer. Yeah, Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas is this peaceful angel who just wants a peaceful future for the Jews and the Palestinians side by side. Oh, yes. This is something that people say all the time. Oh, yeah, well, you blame everything on Hamas in Gaza. What about the West Bank? Hamas isn't in charge there. There they have the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas. Let's talk about Mahmoud Abbas for a minute. Okay? So, going back to just after the turn of the century, in 2000, the second intifada. So this is after the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords in the 90s were these two sit-downs, negotiations that were supposed to set the foundation for some sort of peace deal, some sort of peaceful future between the Jews in Israel and the Palestinians. And after the Oslo Accords, there was a second intifada that started in 2000 and lasted nearly 5 years. In case anyone's not familiar, the second intifada was effectively an almost endless spree of suicide bombings. And suicide bombings, mind you, were attacks that specifically, intentionally targeted civilians. It was suicide bombers who blew up civilian buses full of Jewish Israeli civilians going about life, elderly people, children on the buses. They just were blowing up buses one after the other, often killing everyone on board. They blew up restaurants full of families, cafes. So the second intifada was a almost 5-year spree of terrorism that intentionally targeted civilians specifically. And this was once the Palestinian Authority, the official government of the people of the Palestinian people, the state of Palestine, quote unquote, after they were formed and officially accepted by Israel, Israel agreed to accept the PLO as a valid, as a legitimate entity. They did that sort of, it was a prerequisite to be able to sit down to talk for the Oslo Accord. So Israel, whether or not it made sense, accepted and acknowledged the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, as a legitimate entity and negotiated with them and formed the PA, the Palestinian Authority. right now, today, Mahmoud Abbas is the chairman of the Palestinian Authority and is the chairman of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and the president of the Palestinian Authority and of Fatah. Fatah is a political party that makes up the vast majority of the PA, the Palestinian Authority. So Mahmoud Abbas is, for all intents and purposes, at the top of all of these different branches, which are in reality very much synonymous. The Fatah Party, Palestinian Authority, and the PLO. And he has been for 20 or so years at the top of all of those. So let's talk about this for a minute. The PLO that he's the chairman of was accepted by Israel as an act of good faith, let's say, and acknowledged for the Oslo Accords. And after these accords had happened in the mid-90s, in the year 2000, the Second Intifada breaks out. The Second Intifada was basically non-stop murder of Israeli civilians. Now, let's be clear about who it was that was perpetrating these acts of terrorism for 5 years continuously, blowing up buses with old women and children, blowing up cafes, blowing up restaurants where families are sitting and having a meal, murdering them. Let's talk about who was involved. So one of the most prominent groups of terrorists that was involved in perpetrating these attacks was the Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, they were called. And the reason they were called that was because this group of terrorists formed as a part of, or they formed during the Second Intifada and for the ends of participating in the Second Intifada. The Second Intifada intifada means uprising. The Second Intifada that went from 2000 to 2005 was also known as the Al-Aqsa Intifada, because it was officially in response to Ariel Sharon going to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And in response to that, there was this uprising and uproar, and there was the Al-Aqsa Intifada, the uprising about Al-Aqsa. So the Aqsa Martyrs Brigade was a terrorist group that formed during the Second Intifada, specifically for and to participate in the Second Intifada. And they were one of the most prominent groups in blowing up these buses and restaurants and murdering civilians, intentionally, specifically targeting and murdering civilians. So let's hear a thing or two about the Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. In June 2004, during the Intifada, the Prime Minister of the PA, of the Palestinian Authority, this is the Prime Minister, the second highest ranking official in the Palestinian government at the time, stated openly, publicly, in his official capacity, that we have clearly declared that the Aqsa Martyrs Brigade are part of Fatah, the political party. We are committed to them, to the Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, and Fatah bears full responsibility for the group. This is a political party in the government that Mahmoud Abbas is currently at the head of, and their second highest ranking official stated openly, publicly in his official capacity, proudly, that this group that is blowing up buses full of Israeli civilians, restaurants and cafes full of Israeli civilians, is a part of the party and is officially, the party is committed to them and they accept responsibility for them. This is the party and the government of Mahmoud Abbas. For the record, another, just for context, another one of the most prominent organizations, groups that was involved in carrying out these acts of terror, blowing up buses, murdering families in restaurants and cafes, was the PSS, the Palestinian Security Service. The Palestinian Security Service, for the record, was established in the 90s as a part of the Oslo Accords, as a branch, as an arm of the Palestinian Authority, the official Palestinian government, to fight terrorism and to keep anti-Israeli terrorism under control. And that official arm of the Palestinian Authority that was established during the Oslo Accords was another one of the most active groups in murdering Israeli civilians, families on buses, in restaurants and cafes. This is a branch of the Palestinian Authority of the PLO that Mahmoud Abbas is currently at the top of. And now let's broaden this context and go just a little bit wider. Let's zoom out a little bit more. During the Intifada, an official from a Palestinian Authority official, a government official, stated again publicly on record, quote, "The second Intifada was planned long in advance before Ariel Sharon went to Al-Aqsa. It was planned as a strategy to use violence to pressure Israel. Sharon visiting Al-Aqsa was an excuse." That was a statement made in public on the record by an official of the Palestinian Authority. So this is the peaceful Palestinian Authority that Mahmoud Abbas, who would be a very great partner for peace, is currently at the head of. He's on top of all three of them. I mean, they're ultimately all the same thing, effectively. But even if you want to separate them and say, well, the Fatah is not the PLO, it's not the PA, he's at the top of all three of them. So even if they are separate, they're all under his leadership presently. I want to read you one more quote. According to Mamdouh Nufal, a personal advisor to Yasser Arafat, who was the chairman of the PLO and the president of the PA and Fatah at the time during the Second Intifada, the Palestinian Authority's role in the outbreak and maintenance of the Second Intifada was crucial. From the beginning, this movement, the Intifada, was led and accompanied by the forces of the Palestinian Authority. It is not a movement that was divorced from the authority. So the Palestinian Authority, the Fatah Party, the PLO, were involved in starting and maintaining and continuing the Second Intifada. Mahmoud Abbas is at the top of all three of these. And to top it all off, because, well, that was 20 years ago, what about now? Let's talk about now. Mahmoud Abbas is the president of the Palestinian Authority. There is currently, today, an official governmental fund of the Palestinian Authority that is called the Palestinian Authority Martyrs Fund. This is a fund that gives stipends, that gives monthly payments to the families of terrorists who forfeit their lives, of martyrs who give up their lives murdering Israeli civilians. So Mahmoud Abbas's government presently, at the moment, pays a reward monthly for decades to the families of people who murder Israeli civilians. This is not something that they're hiding. This is an official governmental fund on the public record. And here are a few quotes from Mahmoud Abbas himself. So you can't separate this from him. In 2017, June 2017, Mahmoud Abbas said this about there were people who were making efforts to politically work against the Palestinian Authority Martyrs Fund to end it. And he said that trying to put an end to the Palestinian Authority Martyrs Fund that pays Palestinians to murder Israeli civilians, going against that fund, opposing that fund, is an aggression against the Palestinian people. This is who Cenk is suggesting would be a legitimate partner for peace. In 2018, after the Taylor Force Act was passed, he said, and this was an act of Congress that more or less said that the US government could not give any financial assistance to the PA as long as they're funding terrorism. Mahmoud Abbas's response was, we will not cut or prevent stipends from the families of the martyrs. And further, another quote, if we are left with one penny, we will spend it on the families of the martyrs. This is who Cenk says Israel has to negotiate with because he's a legitimate partner for peace. This is someone who is interested in making peace and cares about the well-being and safety, or would like to have the well-being and safety of the Israeli people, of the Jews in Israel, alongside the Palestinian people. This is Cenk's suggestion. Someone whose party started and supported the Second Intifada, the murder of about 1,000 Israeli civilians over 5 years, blowing up buses, restaurants and cafes. A government and party that was involved actively and supported and accepted responsibility for one of the most egregiously involved terrorist groups, and who till today is running a fund that rewards the murder of Israeli civilians, and says that if he had 1 penny left, that's the thing he would use it for. Cenk, do better.